The worst part was that he smiled when he said it. A relaxed, almost cheerful smile, the kind someone uses when they think they are delivering harmless teasing. That smile is what kept replaying in my mind long after the words hit me like a slap. I was a receipt shoebox in a cloud firm. That is what he called me after 9 years of carrying the department on my back. 9 years of fixing his errors before clients ever saw them. 9 years of making him look more competent than he actually was. And he said it with that pleasant, empty grin that suggested he had no idea what he had just broken. My name is Marin, and I remember that Tuesday with perfect clarity. The office was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that always made me productive. I liked those afternoons. My desk sat near the window, tucked between a filing cabinet older than me and the copier that jammed every 20 pages. I had worked there since I was 22, fresh out of school, grateful for any job that let me crunch numbers and solve problems. Over the years, I became the person clients asked for by name. Even though my partner pretended not to notice, I stayed late without being asked. I fixed discrepancies others created. I trained new hires who took credit for my spreadsheets. And through it all, I kept my head down, thinking that diligence would eventually be rewarded. Reward came in a different form that day. My partner, whose office was separated from mine by a cluttered hallway and a single thin wall, called me in with a casual wave. I thought he wanted to discuss the Henderson account, which I had spent the weekend repairing after his cousin botched the data entry. Instead, he leaned back in his swivel chair, looked at me with a kind of patronizing amusement, and said the sentence that carved itself into my memory. You, Marin, are a receipt shoebox in a cloud firm. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for the punchline, waiting for anything that made it a joke, rather than an insult to the very work that had kept the place functioning. But he continued speaking as if he had offered me a compliment. He said the firm needed to modernize their image. They needed fresh faces and more dynamic approaches. They needed someone with flair. Then he gestured toward the hallway as if presenting a prize on a game show. His cousin, a man who once asked me whether an audit trail was a physical folder he could pick up, was standing outside my office door. He held a box of novelty desk items, including a cactus with googly eyes stuck to the pot. I felt my stomach twist the moment I understood what this was. My partner had already made the decision. My desk was no longer mine. My workload, my systems, my carefully organized processes were being handed to someone who thought double-entry bookkeeping involved handwriting notes twice. I felt something inside me go still. Not numb, not shocked, just still. There is a particular kind of quiet that happens when you realize a person who has relied on you for nearly a decade does not see you at all. That kind of quiet is not weakness, it is calculation. I asked when the transition was supposed to happen. My voice sounded calm, maybe even agreeable. My partner brightened immediately, relieved I was not making this difficult. He said immediately, like it was the most natural thing in the world. His cousin stepped forward eagerly, already asking me to explain the reconciliation software I had personally customized because the standard interface confused him. I stood. I handed over my chair. I even smiled slightly, the same smile he had given me. Then I walked back to my desk, packed only my notebook, and left everything else where it was. The files, the systems, the passwords he never bothered to update. All of it sitting there like a lit fuse, waiting for the wrong person to grab it. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not warn him. Silence was the first step, and I took it gladly. By noon, the office already felt wrong. The air had that charged heaviness it gets when something is unraveling in slow motion, and everyone feels it but pretends not to. The cousin sat at my former desk with the posture of a man trying to look confident while drowning. He had 3 monitors open, none of which he understood, and every few minutes he let out a nervous laugh that echoed across the hall. I kept my expression neutral as I walked past with a stack of folders I no longer had any obligation to process. I was technically still employed, but my duties had been reassigned to him without discussion, so I simply existed in the background and observed. It took him less than 2 hours to lose track of a full week of vendor invoices. He blamed the accounting software at first, pressing random keys like they might magically regenerate the missing files. Then he blamed the cloud storage system. Then he blamed me, loudly, insisting I must have hidden something out of spite. My partner rushed to soothe him, insisting that everything was fine and that transitioning workflows always had bumps. I listened from the break room doorway, stirring sugar into my coffee, watching their panic spread like a crack across glass. By mid-afternoon, the real damage began. A client called asking why their quarterly payroll taxes had been filed under the wrong employer identification number. The cousin claimed the forms were confusing. The client's voice carried through the receiver, sharp and tired, demanding answers. My partner promised to look into it, then immediately closed his door and sat in silence so long I could see the tension in his shoulders from across the office. I had fixed errors like this countless times for him before. This time, I did nothing. The reconciliation sheet was the moment I knew the spiral was irreversible. I glanced over the cousin's shoulder as he tried to piece it together. No formulas, no logic, just mismatched numbers scattered across cells that were never meant to be touched. It looked like a toddler had scribbled on the screen with crayons. Bright colors everywhere, no meaning behind any of it. He clicked randomly, whispering to himself, breathing too fast. Sweat stained the back of his shirt. I leaned against a file cabinet as if I had nowhere else to be. In truth, I was studying the collapse. For 9 years, I had stepped in quietly to prevent scenes like this. I had shielded the firm from their own carelessness so effectively that they mistook my competence for something disposable. It felt surreal watching the consequences finally catch up to them, as if I had let go of a rope they did not know I was holding. When the auditor called, the phone rang with a sound that sliced through the tension like a knife. My partner answered, his voice cracking before he forced it steady. The auditor wanted clarification on several discrepancies. They mentioned irregularities in cash flow statements, mismatched vendor files, and inconsistent digital signatures. My partner opened his mouth to say something reassuring, then looked at me through the glass wall of his office, hoping I would step in out of habit. I did not. He motioned for me. I did not move. The auditor asked for the person who prepared the files. My partner hesitated, then waved at me desperately, mouthing something that looked like "please help." I took the phone, but not for the reason he expected. I confirmed the auditor's concerns, spoke with calm precision, and then gave them my partner's direct number. Not the general line, not the office administrator, his personal extension, the one he usually avoided giving to anyone who might hold him accountable. He went pale when he realized what I had done. The auditor thanked me. I told them he would answer all further questions. I set the phone down gently. Then I walked away. I heard the fallout begin behind me, voices rising, footsteps rushing, papers shuffling in frantic movements. I kept walking, feeling an unfamiliar lightness settle into my chest. For 9 years, I had held their world together. That afternoon, I allowed it to fall apart exactly as it deserved. The first day after the auditor call felt like standing in a building where every support beam had begun to crack. Nothing collapsed outright, but the sound of strain was constant. Phones rang in frantic bursts. Clients demanded explanations I no longer provided, and the cousin shuffled from desk to desk carrying printouts he did not understand. The office smelled like old coffee and panic. I spent that day doing only what was required of me. Nothing more, nothing less. Observing the unraveling with the calm detachment of someone who has already stepped out of the blast radius. By the second day, the fallout intensified. 3 long-term clients called in a row, each one angry, each one claiming invoices were missing, payments were misapplied, or quarterly filings did not match their records. The cousin insisted the system had glitched. The system he blamed was the same one I had maintained flawlessly for years. My partner tried to smooth things over, using his practiced charm, but charm lacks the power to resurrect lost data or recreate financial accuracy. It only stalled the inevitable, and his voice carried a strain that suggested he knew it. The auditor sent a follow-up request that afternoon. It was longer, more pointed, listing discrepancies that stretched back months. That part surprised me. Months. I had covered for my partner often, but the cousin had apparently been allowed to dabble in tasks long before he officially took my desk. Privilege without competence leaves a trail, and the auditor was following it with surgical precision. My partner's office door remained shut most of the day, though I heard him pacing inside, the rhythm uneven, the footsteps restless. By the third day, the cousin had begun snapping at everyone. He claimed he could not do his job because the internet was too slow, because the printer was demonic, because I had sabotaged the spreadsheet templates. I listened without reacting as he told another coworker that I had left traps in the system. The idea would have been insulting if it were not so absurd. My work needed no traps. His incompetence defeated him all on its own. Late that afternoon, my partner approached me with the hesitant steps of someone approaching a cliff edge. His voice cracked as he asked if I could return to my old workload temporarily, just until the audit calmed down. He said it with the tone of someone who expected the same quiet compliance I had given him for 9 years. I told him I was unavailable. I gave no excuse, no apology, just those words spoken calmly, and the look on his face revealed how deeply he had counted on my silence. That night, instead of worrying, I opened my laptop and began researching firms that valued precision. Ones that rewarded accuracy rather than familiarity, ones that promoted skill instead of bloodlines. I felt something unfamiliar settle over me as I scrolled through listings and company profiles. Freedom, not the dramatic kind, but a steady, grounded awareness that I no longer owed my loyalty to people who had treated it so casually. The fourth day delivered the moment that shifted everything. I received a message from a recruiter I had met by chance at a conference 2 years earlier. At the time, we had spoken briefly about career goals, and she had handed me her card. I had never used it. Now she reached out saying she had heard whispers about the audit and wanted to know if I might be open to conversation. Her timing felt precise, almost fated. I agreed to a call. During our conversation, she described a mid-sized finance firm expanding rapidly, looking for someone with strong reconciliation skills and a reputation for quiet accuracy. As she spoke, I realized she was describing the version of myself I had worked to become. Not the version my partner had dismissed so easily. She offered to set up an interview for the following week. By the 5th day, the office felt like a sinking ship. Papers piled on every surface, clients called every hour, and my partner looked like he had aged 10 years. He approached me again, desperate, offering overtime pay, promising recognition, insisting he had always appreciated me. His words slid off me like water off glass. I told him I had other commitments. He stared at me as if finally noticing I was no longer standing in his shadow. Opportunity was opening where loyalty had collapsed, and for the first time in 9 years, I stepped towards something that belonged entirely to me. The interview took place on a crisp Thursday morning, the kind that made the city feel sharper and cleaner than usual. I arrived early, not out of nervousness, but because punctuality had become a habit I never questioned. The lobby of the finance firm was bright with tall windows and quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the cluttered chaos I had left behind. When the hiring director greeted me, she did so with a firm handshake and a directness that told me she valued competence over charisma. That alone made me relax more than I expected. During the conversation, they asked about the audit situation at my former firm. They did not ask in a gossipy way. They asked to evaluate how I handled pressure and failure that was not my own. I answered honestly. I explained what processes had been ignored, what systems had been mismanaged, and how a reliance on family ties had blinded leadership to growing structural risks. I kept my voice steady, not defensive and not accusatory. I simply told the truth. The director listened with a thoughtful expression, occasionally nodding as if confirming her own suspicions about firms that ran on charm instead of precision. When the interview concluded, she excused herself for a moment. I expected to wait days for a response. Instead, she returned with a second person, the operations vice president, who smiled as if I had already passed a test. They asked a few final questions, mostly about how I approached complex reconciliations and how I handled competing deadlines. Then they exchanged a glance I recognized instantly. It was the look of people who had just found exactly what they needed. They offered me a senior position right there in the conference room, the kind of position that would have taken me years to earn under my former partner. I accepted without hesitation. When I stepped out into the sunlight afterward, it felt like air filled my lungs more fully than it had in months. I walked several blocks before stopping at a small park to sit on a bench and process what had just changed. A new job, a senior role, a firm that valued accuracy and accountability. It felt like stepping into a life that had been waiting for me, a life I had not been able to pursue while tethered to someone who believed I was replaceable. That afternoon, I updated my professional profile. I kept the announcement simple, nothing dramatic, just a clean statement about joining a firm known for growth and integrity. The notification pinged my former partner within minutes. I knew it because my phone lit up with his incoming call before I even closed the app. Then another, then a third. I let them ring out. He followed with messages asking to talk, saying he hoped there were no hard feelings, assuring me things at the office were stabilizing. None of it surprised me. People who rely on others without noticing them always panic when the foundation shifts. The truth was the office was not stabilizing at all. By the end of that week, I heard from a former coworker that 3 clients had formally withdrawn their accounts. Another had threatened legal action. The auditor had returned with additional questions, and this time, their tone was not polite curiosity but methodical suspicion. Fees began piling up, the kind that ate through profits like acid. Even the cousin had started avoiding the office, claiming illness while quietly updating his resume. My former partner tried to present a calm front, but the edges of his composure had begun to crumble. I watched all of it from a distance, detached but not indifferent, not satisfied but not sorrowful either. It was simply the natural outcome of a structure built on convenience rather than competence. I spent my evenings reviewing onboarding materials for my new job, studying internal systems, learning their software, preparing to step into a role that expected excellence. For the first time in a long time, I felt challenged in a way that energized me rather than drained me. Every task felt like a brick placed deliberately in the foundation of the life I was constructing. My former partner continued calling for several days, the tone of his messages shifting from polite to urgent to something close to desperate. I ignored each one. He had made it clear what he valued. Now the universe was simply confirming whether that value could sustain him without me. It could not. The regulatory notice arrived on a Monday morning, the kind of morning where the world feels deceptively ordinary. I was settling into my new role, reviewing a set of quarterly projections, when a former coworker sent me a discreet message. The subject line was a single word, notice. Inside was a screenshot of the letter delivered to my former firm, stamped with the unmistakable seal of the State Regulatory Board. The auditor had finished their review, and the findings were not mild, not fixable, not something that could be smoothed over with charm or excuses. Violations confirmed, penalties imposed, a supervisory failure ruling with my partner's name printed in bold. I read the document twice, not out of disbelief, but out of the quiet satisfaction of watching truth finally settle where it belonged. The cousin had already disappeared by then, dismissed quietly the previous week without acknowledgement or ceremony. The firm did not announce it. They simply let him fade out the back door, carrying the same box of novelty items he had brought in with so much misplaced confidence. Removing him solved nothing. The damage came from months of negligence and years of misplaced trust. Clients were already pulling away. Some had filed complaints. Others had demanded complete record transfers. No discussion. By the time the notice arrived, the firm was no longer a sinking ship. It was already underwater. I assumed my former partner would retreat into silence, but instead he tried a final act of desperation. That afternoon my phone rang 3 times in a row, his name flashing across the screen with a persistence I had not seen from him in years. When I finally answered, the first thing I heard was the strain in his voice. He tried to sound composed, but there was a tremor beneath every word. He said the firm was under immense pressure. He said the penalties were severe. He said the auditor had demanded additional documentation that he could not locate. He asked if I had kept copies of anything, if I remembered how certain reports had been structured, if I could advise him on how to respond to the findings. He was begging. I listened without interrupting, letting him speak himself into a corner. 9 years of assuming I would pick up the pieces had trained him to believe I always would. When he finally ran out of words, I spoke with the same calm that had once saved him from disaster after disaster. I told him I had nothing to offer the firm. My duties had been handed to a novice. My desk had been given away. My systems had been dismantled. My loyalty had been dismissed the moment I became inconvenient. There was nothing left to fix. He tried again, switching to flattery, insisting the firm had always depended on me, that I had always been the backbone of the department. He said he admired my skill, that he respected my work, that he wished he had shown that appreciation sooner. His words drifted toward apology, but apologies delivered under pressure are not apologies at all. They are strategies. I refused to play the role he needed. I told him I hoped he would find a way through the mess he had created, but I would not be part of it. The silence that followed felt like the final breath of something long overdue. The call ended. In many ways, so did his career. News travels fast in finance. Within days, I heard that his partners had removed him from all client-facing responsibilities. A senior consultant had been brought in to salvage what remained of the firm. Several employees were already looking for work elsewhere. The office that had once been held together by my quiet diligence was now collapsing as predictably as a structure built on guesswork. In the quiet after the storm, I understood something with absolute clarity. Betrayal follows a pattern older than any industry. Someone undervalues you because your competence makes their flaws invisible. Someone replaces you with someone easier because ease feels cheaper than excellence. And then, only when the consequences arrive, they discover too late that the quiet one was holding the entire structure together. Revenge does not always require rage. Sometimes it is simply choosing not to return when the tower begins to fall, letting gravity finish the work while you walk forward into a life built on your own terms.